our strength and Redeemer.
Amen.
Amen. See you. So we just had this reading not too long ago on Sunday. And I talked about how we tend to think Jesus is sort of elevating the Samaritan or judging the 9 that didn't turn back. And how I asked the question then, well, all 10 left and they were made clean, and 1 returned. Were the others punished? Was their healing taken away? It was the act of obeying what Jesus said that cleaned them, that healed them. And the Samaritan did something extra, so he returned. And I think it's interesting to cast that idea onto what was read today in wisdom. Listen, therefore, O kings, and understand. Learn, O judges of the ends of the earth. Because as servants of his kingdom you did not rule rightly or keep the law or walk according to the purpose of God, he will come upon you terribly and swiftly, because severe judgment falls on those in high places. The Samaritan was a foreigner. Now, Samaritans were also Hebrews, so he did know the law. He did understand the hierarchy of things. He wasn't confused when Jesus said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." But at the same time, he might not have been able to go to the priest. If it was a Judean temple that he was being sent to, they wouldn't let him in. So the other 9, though, must have been Judeans. More was expected of them, because they had the law directly. They had been interacting with the temple. They had been taught by the Pharisees. They had all this extra experience and knowledge and information. So they were expected to follow the rules. It'd be like having, Thanksgiving's coming up. If you have a guest come over and you've got some sort of specific family rule, like no one sits in that chair because it's grandpa's, or no one eats until the youngest person has been served, or whatever, and they do something out of turn. They start to eat because you've already said grace, and that's what they do at their house. Once, it's just you eat as you're filling your own plate. You don't judge them for not knowing your rule. You might correct them and say, "Hey, give it a rest. We do this," but you don't judge them on it. But if your cousin who's always there, or your children who are there and know these rules do it, you judge them more harshly. You say, "Hey, you know the rules. Pay attention." That's kind of what wisdom is saying here. The rulers and kings, the understanding is that people rule because God allows them to rule, at the very least. It's not necessarily that God chooses them to rule, but God allows them to rule. And because they have been given authority, whether divine authority or worldly authority, that comes with responsibility. And part of that responsibility is acting rightly towards God's people. And God's people is, of course, everyone. Whether they want to be God's people or not, you're God's people. And so these kings, these rulers, the judges of the ends of the earth, I love that phrasing, it's just everybody in authority. You're being talked to here. Because as servants of his kingdom, even if you don't know it, if you are in authority and you're ruling over God's people, you are servants of his kingdom. And you did not rule rightly or keep the law, or walk according to the purpose of God, he will come upon you terribly and swiftly, because severe judgment falls on those in high places. So if you have responsibility, then you are going to be judged more harshly, swiftly and terribly, severely. You're going to be judged. Because, one, you should know. And if you don't know, if you are in charge of people, it is your job to know. You need to educate yourself. You need to understand. And if you don't, you turn to those that do. And this is true if you're looking at the kings and rulers, the judges of the ends of the earth, as wisdom says here, or if you're looking at families. You think of how many novels or movies start where the family is destitute because the father or grandfather, whoever had responsibility for their finances in their future, did something ridiculous with it. Especially, I was watching an old TV show, and this always comes up. It's like, oh, he invested in blueberry trees or something, and something that doesn't exist, or they get taken in by an investment scheme. Today might be the Nigerian prince scheme, or convinced that, I don't know, Brad Paisley is in love with you, and so you give all your money to him online. Whatever it is, they've done something foolish, something they ought not to have done, something that, had they exercised any common sense, they wouldn't have done. And if they were operating not knowing what they were doing, they should have turned to someone and said, hey, do you think it's possible that this guy has $1 million he wants to give me, and all I have to do is wire him $40,000 and he'll send it? And somebody would say no. But in hubris, especially for people who are in charge of things, whether it is parents or priests or principals or CEOs or presidents or whatever, they tend to say, well, I know best. People think I know best, and that's why they put me here. And that's why they follow me. That responsibility comes with it. Probably the greatest responsibility is to question yourself, to turn back, to be like that Samaritan who says, oh, maybe there's more I need to learn from this guy who is giving me the healing. Maybe I need to turn to someone else. Maybe I need to ask more questions. It's what I talked about on All Saints Day. Turning to those who have gone before us to learn from them, to gain the information. Maybe we make decisions that are different than they would say, but we need to give ourselves the information. We need to incorporate other people's judgments into what we do. Because that's how we can incorporate God's judgment into what we do. Because whether we like it or not, whether we believe in Him or not, whether we are trying to or not, we are servants of God's kingdom. We need to act like it. We need to understand our role and then embrace it and hold ourselves as accountable as we will be held by others. And ultimately, that's where we become the judges of the ends of the earth, because we understand the judgment is already there. We need to do our best to make the decisions, to understand our responsibility, our legacy, our impact on those that come after us and around us. To God be all the glory, now and forever.
Amen.